Welcome to Play School to Pokémon. Here we're going to explore the world of play. We're going to be thinking about what is play, why it's important for children's media, and we've got a panel of experts here to answer these questions and more. We're going to explore play theory, incorporating play into kids' media, co-creation with kids, and we're going to look at some practical tips to harness the power of play. So, first of all, let's meet our panel. First of all, we've got Dr. Amanda Gummer. Amanda is a research psychologist and the CEO of Fundamentally Children and Dr. Gummer's Good Play Guide. Next up, we've got Karen Newell. Karen's a freelance media and play consultant, currently the brand guardian for Mix 'em Ups on Milkshake. Then we've got Hattie Foster. Hattie is the strategy director at Preloaded, a BAFTA award-winning immersive game studio known for creating playful, purposeful experiences for family audiences. And last but not least, we've got BAFTA and RTS award-winning producer Andy Mundy Castle. He's the founder of Doc Hearts production company, known for telling stories with passion, purpose, and style for broadcasters, brands, and streamers. He's also the creator of the preschool series Go Green with the Grimweights and the award-winning Ruan Harper's Wonderworld. Thank you so much for joining us. So we promised you an interactive session. So before we dive into our discussion, we're going to take you back to your childhood. So picture yourself as a 3-year-old. Imagine I give you a cardboard box. What would you do with it? Would you climb inside it? Would you pretend it's a rocket ship or something else? Take a moment and tell the person sitting next to you, if you have someone sitting next to you, what you would do with the box. Off you go. What would you do?
I would get it in it and go down. It was really
Okay. As I used to say when I was a teacher, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. So why did we ask? We're asking because it tells us something about your play personality. And here are 5 types of play personality. Which one would you say best describes you? Have a little look.
I like the transforming ones. Yeah.
Are you imaginative? Are you physical? Are you emotional? Are you someone who would engage more in social play? Or would you say that you're a creative? So just hold that thought. Karen's going to share a little bit more about that later. But first up, let's see how play has been represented in children's content over the decades. Let's run the VT.
Ernie, what are you doing up there? You're upside down.
Oh, no, I'm not, Bert. I'm right side up.
Get ready to play.
Fantastic. We're all here because we're involved in children's media in one way or another. And for a lot of us, at the heart of that is play and entertainment. So let's just think about play. Amanda, let's start with the basics. What is play theory? And what are its fundamental concepts? And how does it impact child development?
Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, so play theory is really the understanding that play is how children learn, it's how they develop. And it started really, well, I mean, you can go back to Plato, who's one of my favourite quotes is you can learn more about somebody from an hour of play than a lifetime of conversation. I still think that's true. But play theory really gained traction with Vygotsky. He's one of my gurus. If you don't know anything about the work of Lev Vygotsky and you're at all interested in this area, highly recommend you do a bit of research on him. But he found that kids learn, or we learn, we're social beings, it's social constructivist theory, and we learn from others. We don't have to, it's not all trial and error learning. There's a lot of trial and error learning, and kids do that, and that's part of play. But actually, we learn from other people, which is why progress happens, because we're not starting from scratch. We're building on other people's knowledge. And that gets passed through generations to generations. And media is one of those ways that we can transfer some of that knowledge. So that recognition that children learn through play came about with Vygotsky and then was built on by people like Parton, who looked at the different stages of social play. So children start off playing individually, in solitary. They might be interacted with by an adult, but if they're playing, they're on their own. They then play in parallel. So there might be other people playing in the room, but they're playing alongside somebody else before they then start to play with other people collaboratively at the age of 3 or so. So that evolved, and then the work, again, another hero of mine, Brian Sutton-Smith, who looked at different types of play and the fact that cultural and environmental features impact on play. Then you've got things like Peter Gray and David Elkind, who looked at the value of open-ended play, so it wasn't goal-oriented, but actually what children learn by just playing for playing's sake, and really that was a real sea change in sort of the helping us, and certainly been a big influence on my life in terms of just watching kids play freely without having a goal and seeing what they learn there. And then as we understood more about the brain and how kids develop, Stuart Brown's work on the biological and neurological foundations of play and what play does to the brain, that all came through. And then more recently, we've been looking at play in tech and how that evolves. And really, things like play as a therapeutic tool, play to be more inclusive, and I know Karen's going to talk more about that, play for well-being, all of those things have evolved. And the whole concept of play theory is based on the principle that play is good for kids. It's not just frivolous.
And how does the ability to play impact a child's development, would you say?
I think, so we have the model called the balanced play pyramid, and being able to have lots of different types of play and children feeling free to play according to them. One of my big pushes when I'm talking to parents is around letting kids be bored and not over-scheduling them, so that kids can have that, what do I want to do? What am I interested in? And that self-knowledge is really good for their mental health as well as their development. So they can find things that they find enjoyable and that they have a talent for. But play is also a way of helping children overcome things that they are struggling with.
So it's almost like a tool that they can use throughout their life in different situations, as in addition to being something that they do in itself, in its own right.
Yeah, and what I think is really interesting is as our knowledge of play and children's development has grown, you've seen in the VT the reflection of the different types of content and playfulness that gets reflected in children's media. And I think it's the whole Maya Angelou quote, when we know better, do better kind of thing. And as we know more about children's development and how their brains work, we're building in better content and more playfulness into that content. I think it's really important.
And just thinking about that, can you provide some examples of play theory in action within children's media?
So I think looking back at some of the clips from the VT, I think the understanding that children learn through play, so things like Art Attack and Number Blocks, that's all come through. I think the recognition that children were engaging with TV, the Teletubbies really took that on. There was a lot of research in the development of Teletubbies into how children acquire language, and so that was fed into that. And again, Karen's going to talk about that sort of inclusive play and how to make play more inclusive has been represented more recently. And I think those kind of, that evolution of content aligns with the evolution of play theory.
As the knowledge about the way children play has increased, I guess the content being produced has changed in order to adapt to that knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, and I think it makes better content.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Karen, Amanda was speaking about Teletubbies, obviously. That's your jam. You've worked with Anne Woods on Teletubbies, which obviously is a pioneering show in the field. I mean, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I was so lucky to work at Ragdoll at that time. It was just after Teletubbies became a phenomenon that it was. And my first day at work was in the Teletubbies house. Can you imagine walking into that? And it was just as magical as you can imagine. It was a real place with big fat rabbits running around. and it just, for me, it put into perspective what Ragdoll was about. And it was about play, and it was about curiosity, and it was about magic. So I was very lucky to work quite closely with Anne and Chris. Her important was about the children's responses. So I was employed as a children's response person, and we got to work on all different shows. And we worked with children around listening, and we gave the time for children to watch, and we listened to children and we took on board their responses. She was passionate about that, and she understood the language of play. You wouldn't go into anybody else's environment and not understand their language, but people do. Children play, and that is how they develop their critical thought. And if you want to work with them, then you need to understand that language of play. So, like I said, my job was to observe the audiences, and to better connect with those audiences, I worked with Anne on play theory, in terms of play types, play behaviours. So we did a lot of work around play schemas. So there are the things that children do. There's patterns of children's behaviour. You wonder why they drop things from their high chair. Well, they're working with trajectory and gravity and balance. You wonder why they do things. It's all because they are playing with those concepts and they're learning. So you might wonder why a child's obsessed with the wheels of a car or obsessed by spinning. Well, they're learning around rotation and they're learning about their body. So once you understand the language of play, I think you can understand what you need to create more compelling content. So I spent hours. I spent hours working with children and what they look like. So on my second day, I remember going with Chris Wood with a piece of VT that was just roughly cut and it was silent. And I was like, what are the kids going to make of this? And so they watched in silent and they started to go, and then they started to vocalise. Come on, Brum. Yeah, he's behind you. He's there. Watch it. Oh, and so you could see we were looking at pace, timing, content, edit, just from the mouths of children.
Fantastic. And just briefly, what qualified you to do that work out of interest?
I was
What's
a play
your
worker.
background?
Yeah, I was a play worker.
Okay.
I'd worked within the voluntary sector and the public sector, always and a children's rights perspective as well.
Okay, perfect. And obviously we know each other because we work together currently, because you're a play consultant for Mixed Mups. How have you applied play theory to the work that you're doing with Mixed Mups?
Well, it was brilliant with Mixed Mups because I've been on Mixed Mups from the start. So I've worked with Rebecca, who's the executive producer, from the start, and we've developed what we call a whole child, every child approach to children's play. And that is looking at play theory, looking at disability social theory, and also looking at sort of additional educational needs. So we've mixed up all these ingredients for Mixed Mups, and every element of Mixed Mups you will see has been carefully considered and to ensure that there's something for everyone, because we know that the language of play is the way in, and especially when you're talking about disabled children as well. 2 of the characters in Mixed Mups have disabilities. So we're looking at the box, aren't we? We love that box. So it was when Rebecca was doing commission pitches, and we're lucky that Milkshake picked it up and it's fantastic commissioner. But, you know, Rebecca would talk about one of the characters, Giggle. Now, if she had a box, she would create something wonderful out of it, like a wheelchair, fancy dress or a hat, because she is an adventure. She's very much an innovative person. Whereas Pockets, she might actually create a box, she might actually use the box to put her yo-yos in, a beautiful collection, because she's more of an empath and she's more of an emotional player. And then we have Spin, the most boisterous of the lot. He would be in and out of the box, and it would end up flat on the floor. So as you can see, we're all different players and we'd all play with the box in a different way.
And it's what you've done with Mixed Mups is just nothing short of incredible. So it's been amazing working with you on that. And obviously you have, Amanda has the academic background. You have a, real world, practical application that you can apply from your experiences, a play worker. But obviously, Andy, you're coming at it from very much a creative perspective. Your show, Ruin Harper's Wonderworld, centres around play dates. Let's have a little look at that, and maybe you can share some of your practice with us.
On a play day, every boy and girl can learn something from around the world. 'Cause the friends we make every day might have families they used to live much further away. There's so many fun things to discover in Ruin Harper's Wonderworld. What kind of things do we eat in our Wonderworld? How do we dance to the beat in our Wonderworld? What kinds of clothes do we wear in our Wonderworld? What can we make and share in our Wonderworld? Come on, it's time to meet all of the boys and girls in Ruin Harper's Wonderworld.
Talia's first activity is using something you'll see in lots of places in Nigeria.
So this is called Ankara, and this is like a colourful fabric, and we're going to make a fan with it. Do you want to choose which fabric you want? I'm using this one. Okay. This one. Ooh, yeah.
All those fans are going to be great.
Bro, do you need help? Yes, please. Okay. We're gonna go like that. Okay. And then just keep doing it. Yeah, good.
The fabric is also used to make other things. Let's find out more. Ankara fabrics are usually bright, colourful patterns and are used to make lots of things, including clothes, shoes and bags. It's not only used for special occasions like this, but also worn every day.
When you get to the last bit, fold it, pick it up like this. I done it. Didn't get wrong. Wow, that's actually very good. Nice. Wow, it feels very nice, especially when it's a hot day.
Don't they look fantastic?
Oh, good. I think that deserves a round of applause. Fantastic to see you play in action and that sort of side-by-side playing happening there. So, Andy, how did the concept for Ruin Harper come about, and why did you want to create the show?
It's really interesting. When we were deciding what clip to share, I chose the Nigerian episode because I'm part Nigerian, and this idea actually came when my son was on a play date. And he was with two friends, one who is his best friend, who is also a Nigerian, and another friend who's a young white British boy. And my son was calling his Nigerian friend's dad uncle. And his British friend said to him, "Is he your uncle? Are you two cousins?" And my son said to him, and I just observed the whole thing, my son said to him, "No, in my dad's culture, it's respectful to call an older man uncle." And then they went into this whole conversation about each other's cultures. And that's why this idea came about. Really, it was sort of that I thought, oh, cultural play dates, really interesting, and I've always sort of thought about those fantastic formats like, Come Dine With Me or Through the Keyhole or whatever. And, you sort of look at the children's space and think, well, how do children learn about each other? And what can we offer them to help learn about each other? So the idea of, well, what do my kids do anyway? I'm on a play date pretty much every weekend. So it was just a really great space to, interrogate a format that could help explore culture through play.
Oh, fantastic. And did you have any experience of play theory or anything in that space before you went ahead and sort of started producing this show?
No, it's interesting because I was having a conversation earlier on, and you sort of, I think play is intrinsic to all of us. It's what helps you nurture, learn, grow, in your infant years. And so I suppose other than the school of life, no, nothing that was theoretical or practical. Obviously, as a producer, you're sort of thinking of, how do you turn things into entertaining and engaging content? And no, beyond that, there was, I think other than sort of the educational specialists that we had on board the show, I hadn't really thought about play theory to that degree. I just thought, well, actually, of course, this is natural to what children, everything that my child does, be it through homework or education, there is a form of play involved. There's just some element of play. Or if you're trying to get, even just thinking about dinner time, I remember as a child the airplane of the spoon coming into my mouth. It's play, So I suppose there's just so much in that kind of cognitive understanding of it, of all of us, that has an attachment to play. And it's really interesting to hear that quote, actually, the one that you said about, a lifetime of conversation, but an hour of play, because, that probably rings true. So I suppose, I haven't had any formal education in play theory other than right now.
But you've made a fantastic show. I'm just thinking about the contributors that you have and their ages. Ultimately, it's an unscripted show, and it's spontaneous and unforced. What was the process like actually producing it, and what were some of the challenges that you experienced in the process?
The process is ultra fun because Rue and Harper just better than most adult presenters I work with, actually. They're just so professional, and it's such an engaged show. And we actually, in terms of creating each and every episode, we speak to the families, we speak to the children, we try and learn about what they would do had the cameras not been around. And I think the challenge really is always finding ways to, to kind of put a format, to put a framework around the game that might be true to their culture, but also make it palatable for an audience. So the challenge is, I suppose, something that might be an ethereal game or something that they have within their culture, of any culture that we represent through the show, is how do we sort of make that feel like it can also be a thing that we can represent in a program. So you have to sort of think of the framework and the kind of idea that would make it most visible and visual to an audience that aren't in the room at that moment. And also, there is a process of making content that the kids are engaged for a certain amount of time in the game playing. But inevitably, everything sort of needs invigoration, but we may need the shot. We may need to get what we need to do for the show. And obviously, you're also working against the clock because of child working hours. So it's trying to keep it fun within that space of time. It is a challenge, but yes, fortunately, the more you do it, the more techniques you incorporate to kind of help get the best out of the moment. And actually, a lot of, because of our background in unscripted and documentary filmmaking, it's allowing children to just be within that space of time. Actually, during the process of filming, we do allow sort of just a period where they get on with just doing what they would do if they taught each other that game without the crew there. There's always a moment in the episode that is just a naturalistic moment.
I'm actually quite interested in what you're saying about the fact that you came to it through culture, because ultimately what you're alluding to is a level of cultural specificity in play, whereas actually, Amanda, I felt that you were saying that there are lots of universals when it comes to play. So I was wondering, Andy, what did you notice when you were filming different cultures playing? Is there anything that you can share with us any observations? Or not, if there aren't.
No, I think it would be remiss of me to say that, because I'm the exec, so I get the content when it's shot, and I'm there on some of the shoots, not all of them, so I don't see the nuances of each show. But I know that it's always a very engaging process, and to give you a direct answer, I might have to call a few directors.
That's absolutely fine. I mean, just thinking about digital now, Hattie, the digital environment you work in, it really differs vastly from the world of play theorists, it would appear, from the past. How does play and play theory influence your work at Preloaded? And I think we're going to talk through a few slides to help us with that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of projects that I can talk to in a minute, but just at a very high level, it actually impacts our work quite a lot, and possibly in part because of how much digital has to demonstrate often, particularly in the kids space, its efficacy and its value within this kind of media forum. So, you know, at Preloaded, we make immersive and games products, but we talk about our work as play with purpose. And it's really because we believe fundamentally in the value of play in any modality of, you know, across the digital spectrum to support the development of a child and the well-being of a child. Big caveat, if done responsibly and appropriately. And so actually, I think, as Andy said, that ubiquitous nature of play may not have changed over centuries or millennia, but actually the tools and the nature of the play and what we use to facilitate and kind of foster that development has changed enormously. You know, and when we talk about digital play in inverted commas, we're talking about everything from consoles to platforms with Roblox and Fortnite, right through to apps that our kids might do their homework on, through to connected toys that are sitting in the same toy box as physical toys and kids aren't distinguishing, through to dancing and singing on FaceTime. And I think what's fascinating is a kid isn't distinguishing between how they're playing or whether this is imagination in a virtual world versus imagination in a digital world, you know, or the physical world. And so really the same play theories are just as fundamental. And I've got two examples very briefly to show you. So this first one is a project that we did for Andrex, and this is fascinating because it's the younger end of the spectrum, 2 to 4-year-olds, and it's really focusing on the toilet training crisis in the UK, which I don't know if anyone is close to, but there is a delay in the age in which young children are being toilet trained for a number of sort of societal, financial, etc. reasons. And this is a particularly difficult point in a child's development because it's a point at which agency and autonomy can be lost, and that dynamic between parent and child and parent-led involvement is so fundamental. So actually in this project, working with Dr. Gummer, we actually have a kind of light curriculum that supports this, that thinks about not just the cognitive skills that you might need to learn in order to be independent in the bathroom, but also the social and emotional skills that a child needs to learn to feel confident in this environment. So this is all about giving autonomy and agency to a child at a point when they are feeling a loss of it. So this is quite traditional kind of small world play. You work through a character, you are guiding that character, Bunny, successes, celebrating with Bunny, but also supporting Bunny when Bunny's feeling anxious. So with the scaffolding of a parent, which is very Vygotsky in a way, you know, this sense of the parent being an observer, but really involved in that process, that social process, we allow the child to fail and to work through complex everyday subject matter through play, which is such a powerful aspect of it. And then the next project, very briefly, is the opposite end of the spectrum. This is open world play. So this is a project that we've done for the Lego group on Fortnite, slightly older age group, kind of 8+. It's called Cat Island. What's absolutely critical about this and open world play is there is no linear structure to the narrative. And what's crucial is any child can enter this and play in the way that they want to play. So it's really about stimulating story starters within this world that allow the child to imagine and play exactly the way that they want to play. If they want to just go down to the disco and dance with their cats, they can. If they want to go and feed their cats fish, but look after them and feed them and clean them and clean up after them, they can work to more goal-based play. But it's not dictated for them, and that's a really fundamental aspect of healthy play. You're not pushed through a kind of core game loop that encourages you to keep going. So the opposite end of the spectrum to small world play.
That's really fascinating, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, there is an ongoing debate, and you mentioned healthy play, you mentioned non-linear play. There's a debate about the value of screen-based play. I mean, what's your take on this? Obviously, you work in that space. And how would you say the screen-based play compares to traditional play?
This is obviously the big question and the big debate. And I would say I am not sure how useful it is to kind of create a dichotomy between digital play and physical play for exactly the reasons that I mentioned previously, I read something recently, an academic who spoke about play as a continuum, and I think that's a really exciting thing to think about, which is rather than two binaries, it's a spectrum upon which different use cases and different modalities of play can be used to support different child development, aspects. So whether that's skill-based or role play, ultimately it's about finding the right use case for that play and that behaviour and using it in the right context. We do know that digital play has enormous value, agency and autonomy, ability to see cause and effect, ability to fail, which is fundamental in play, and to do that in a safe environment. We know it's incredibly valuable for self-expression, for customization, for being able to, play in the way you want to play and visualize yourself, or play as someone else and the perspectives of someone else. So I don't think that there is any doubt about the value of play relating to traditional play. I think it comes back to two things fundamentally, and I'm sure Amanda will talk about this. One is a healthy play diet that includes everything along that spectrum. I may visit a brand in one context on an app, but that stimulates my play outside in another context. And then I watch an aspect of it on TV that inspires me to go and buy a pair of Wellington boots. And then I go and buy those Wellington boots and I splash around in puddles. So it is this kind of continuum, and it's a real balance. But the second point is just the ethical responsibility of makers to make in a way that is responsible, that is accessible, and inclusive ultimately.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just opening it up, I was just thinking maybe what your thoughts were, maybe Andy. I mean, can screen time ever truly be playtime, do you think?
Yes, I do feel it can. I think, we're in such strange times for many people when it comes to kind of consumption of media. And, it's interesting that Fortnite reference, because my son is hooked on Fortnite, and I have to kind of just curtail the amount of time that he uses on that. But there is part of it that I do feel is educational and can be educational. And I think with sort of traditional media, or the ideas that we come up with, if they are learning something through that edutainment, I do feel that it's completely invaluable. I'm still quite old-fashioned in my beliefs about our industry to really inform, educate, plus entertain. And I think that obviously we're challenged, so everyone's sort of looking for that algorithmic gold, but there's still that intrinsic quality that we are putting into content that is actually trying to do something to just evolve the minds of the younger minds. So I don't want to subscribe to an idea that screen time is potentially too much of it, but too much of anything.
Yes.
Too much chocolate is bad for you. So
A little bit is really nice.
But a little bit is really good, yeah. And I think it's really about the kind of wrap-round control of that, and maybe also not containing it to a degree that kind of doesn't amplify the benefit of it.
No,
But it's also about the quality, isn't it? The quality of the content.
Mm.
I mean, I love taking mix-ups out to a school, and then, the brand emblem is the spoon. We've all got spoons at home, and the most important part of that spoon is it's the first independent tool a child uses as well, and we've all got it. So I love when we show mix-ups at school, and then I go and watch the playtime outside, and the kids are mixing up their own magical adventures. So what Mix-Ups has done is actually tried to bounce play from the screen out into the playground.
Mm. And it's interesting that you brought it back to mix-ups, and because I was actually going to ask you about your experiences as a play worker, but actually when we think of screen time, we often think of gaming, but actually content is delivered by screen, so it is also another form of screen time. Amanda, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we've just done a research project recently on looking at how the content on screen impacts on the off-screen play behaviours. And if it's done well, that's exactly what happens. And it's not about, like Hattie was saying, it shouldn't be about a dichotomy. It should be much more about giving children a real mix of experiences. And if they can develop their creativity online or on the screen, great, they're developing their creativity. It's the same when people ask me, how do I help my kids to read? I don't care whether you're reading a book or an iPad or a recipe card or a football program. If you're getting your kids to read, that's great. And it's about finding those playful ways for content to spark that creativity or that playfulness in the real world, as well as, you know, through connected toys. And I mean, the title of today's session is, you know, that Pokémon Go is a great example of kids playing socially, actively, creatively, you know, outside. And the fact that there's an iPhone or something there as well, and they're looking for digital creatures, I don't care, that's great. They're outside, they're having fun, they're running around, they're eating better, sleeping better, and everybody's having a good time.
And ultimately, the children at the heart of the play, which I think is really critical. Just thinking about how, obviously, there are lots of people involved in the creation of content, and just think about co-creation now, Amanda. And what is co-creation, and why would you say it's important to involve children in co-creation, and to some extent as junior consultants?
So, one of the exercise I do when I'm doing some training on ages and stages is get people to sit down on the floor so that they can see the world from a child's perspective, because they're not just little adults, they are qualitatively different to grown-ups. There are changes that happen in our brains as we get older. So understanding children's world, understanding their experiences today better than ever, more than ever, is so important, and you can do that through well-designed co-creation. As a researcher, I worry about people just sort of asking kids what they think and then taking that verbatim, because if you ask children what they want for dinner, they're going to say chips and chocolate every day, and we know that that's not right for them. But I think that's prevented us from taking their voices seriously, and I think it's really important to use playful techniques in co-creation to help guide what kids need. They know what they need, they just don't necessarily have the social and cognitive skills to be able to develop it, or to articulate it. But I mean, Hattie's done a great job with the co-creation on the Lego stuff, and you used kids in that really effectively, didn't you?
You want to briefly tell us a little bit about
that? So I think, you know, the difference between what Amanda's talking about is what stage you bring children into the process and what level of autonomy you give them to creatively control and contribute towards the outcome. And often the mistake that's made is you test to validate, and you do it too late in your process, at which point you kind of want the answer that you've designed for, and it's very hard to then retrofit. So co-creation coming as early in the process as possible, really to stimulate and give the child the right to say, well, this is what I think is funny about this, and I don't find this funny at all. Or, oh, well, if I was in space, this is really how I'd play with these things, or this is what I'd expect to see, and creating enough tools and environments really that they feel that they can freely direct that product. You can then de-risk your product development because you actually have that knowledge up front, rather than bringing a child in at a point at which it's too late. So, yeah.
And Andy, thinking about Rue and Harper, I mean, you mentioned that they are fantastic and that actually easier to work with than some adults. Was there an element of co-creation either with the Rue and Harper or with some of the contributors when you were making that series?
Very much so. I think with each, so typically we have 3 format points within each show, in which are all, kind of designed around play. And with each one, we do speak with both the host family and with our presenters, with Rue and Harper, just to kind of get a reading on the appetite for it. And we'd kind of whittle it down to some things, and then whichever one there's a greater propensity for engagement with, we tend to go that direction. But that is often influenced by a sort of test process, so we'd sort of talk about it or and then back and forth with the commissioning team as well on what we're planning on doing. So there's a whole sort of curation, but the children are very much involved with that.
Fantastic.
And so it often offers the best, sometimes I think one of the challenges with that is you might get an immediate honest response. It's like, I'm not dancing, from Rue, from Rue typically. But as we've gone along, they've kind of got an idea of things almost kind of cross cultures in very similar ways, which has also been an interesting byproduct of the outcome of the show.
And there's such a level of authenticity in that process, and also a truth. I mean, Karen, obviously, you almost took it one step further, because on Mix 'em Ups, you're using junior consultants. And do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and we involved children right from the start. We were really lucky to get some young audience content development fund. So we ensured we had junior consultants, disabled children as junior consultants, to help us firstly design the characters. The origination team have all got lived experience of disability. None had any lived experience of wheelchair use. So obviously we've got Giggle, who's a wheelchair user. So we had a few junior consultants, and they were fantastic in telling us what they wanted to see. So they were both really fed up of people asking, do you sleep in your chair? Do you eat in your chair? And they're like, we want to see a disabled character in a wheelchair transfer, because we don't see that often. So it was unanimous. And also in the design of the wheelchair, I remember them saying, you couldn't use that foot plate because we couldn't get out. So they were essential in working with us on that. In terms of the design of the character, you cannot represent all disability, so don't even try, but you can represent disability authentically. So Giggle, the wheelchair-using character, is representative of one boy. It's his life, it's his movement. And the wonderful McKinnon and Saunders made sure they spent time looking at the movement of him. Even the puppet of Giggle has a curvature of the spine inside its body. So it's really important. That observation and that detail is really important. And Pockets, who's the visually impaired character, her eye condition is based on Rebecca's, who's partially sighted. And so once again, they spent hours with Rebecca and her guide dog in how they walk and how they move together. And if you watch Mix 'em Ups, you'll see there's sort of like a blindism of movement, really. So it's the detail, and that wouldn't happen without looking at people with lived experience and children with lived experience.
That's fantastic. We've actually covered quite a lot today, and I really want to give everyone a chance to ask some questions. So before we wrap up on the panel, can you just give us your top tip, each of you, starting with Hattie, for how you would incorporate play theory or co-creation in your project? Like, what's your top tip for everyone here?
I think if pushed to make it snappy, I would say kids know best, which could seem like a very obvious thing to say, but I think if you're going to spend the time and the money factoring in co-creation, make sure that we all realise as makers that our job is to facilitate the right environment in order to get a truly authentic response. Nothing invalidates responses more than a child feeling like they need to say something that will appease you. So they are the experts in that process and facilitate that environment for them.
Andy?
I suppose I'll talk from a producing capacity. I think I was actually going to say something very similar, but I think that it's about engaging with the right kind of expert and rooting that sort of early understanding of play through the child in something that we can hold on to, that that kind of just formulates that idea in a more robust way. So it's I suppose if it's designed by play, like, what is that real world takeaway that you can kind of make work for content, but also have something that is actually a transferable skill away from the screen.
So something tangible, fantastic.
Yeah.
And Karen?
Yeah, I would say make time for children's responses within your production, make a budget, and respect children. And also, whilst you're doing that, just reconnect with your own inner child, because we're not children of today. We're not the 3 to 5 years of today, but we were children once. So I think reconnect with your own inner child, and I think you'll have a better connection with the children today.
I was going to say pretty much what Andy was going to say, so I'll try and... so I think that kind of whole ecosystem, kids don't differentiate between digital and physical play, so creating a content and a brand that allows children to play everywhere, I think, is really important. But the other thing is, I think, understanding your audience, understanding who you're making something for, and, like Karen said, be authentic to that audience, because we talk about children, but there are millions of children, and they all have very different needs and developmental ages and stages. So really understand who it is you're making for, and understand them.
Perfect. And before we get ready for the questions. What would you do with the box?
I would make a den out of it.
Karen?
I would get in it and try and go down the stairs on it.
Andy?
I actually used to do this. It's quite sadistic. Well, I used to catch birds with a box. So I'd hide breadcrumbs at the bottom of a box and have a string from a door, and literally when I'd see the birds, I'd pull it down, catch some birds. Sorry.
And Hattie?
I'd be a bird
follow
catcher.
that. I think mine is a den as well, but like these two in the middle, I'd be forcing someone into it with me.
Okay, I think we're going to open the floor for questions. Does anyone have any questions about play theory, or want to find out anything more about some of the processes that anybody used during creation?
There's one there.
Okay. I've got to take my glasses off now. I can't see.
My name's Elishba. I'm in my second year of university, and I'm studying animation. And when I made my own projects, one of the things that I would do is like make toys of my characters. And I have a little sister, so one of my characters she's about the same age. So one of the ways as I would incorporate play was let her play with the toys and kind of get her input on that. And I'd also play along with her. So my question would be, with people who have, like, say, access to children and are also working within, like, that kind of age range, what advice would you give for kind of getting that natural play and, like, interacting with kids to get their feedback?
Anyone want to jump in?
Well, you're doing a great thing already, enabling that space to play. I would definitely take a step back and observe that play, because I think when children are playing, they're using all types of language, and you will see what comes out of that play. So I think you're doing a great thing already, and carry on.
I think from our perspective, one of the things that we see is, here kids, I've got this toy I've made, what do you think of it? You've got social desirability effects. She's your sister, she's going to want to tell you something that nice to make you feel better. And also, it's a new toy. It's got that wow novelty factor. So when you're really wanting to get that authenticity feeling, is rather than saying, here's something, try it out, what do you think? Just leave it out in amongst her other toys, and then see how she interacts with it and what she does with it. I think that gives you a comparison between how she's interacting with that and the other things that she's got.
What are you thinking, Hattie?
I was just going to say that prototyping in physical form is a really powerful method in the early stages of projects, regardless of whether you're going to go on to be in Fortnite in an open world, because actually that sense of theatre and watching children play and seeing what they do with different kind of materials and props is really powerful. So I think it's, prototyping we use in really early stages. Some might be digital components, but I think physical prompts are really powerful testing mechanisms. So,
and just one thing on that as well. My dad was a child psychologist, and one of the things that he did, and I'm sure why I'm in this industry now, is that he would always record anything that he did with the children, just so that you have a third perspective, just to see and pick up on the behaviours and the things that might not be so obvious in the moment, obviously with consent and the right kind of protocols in place, but just taking a step back, even if you're engaging with them on screen, just having something to record and observe that moment allows you to pick up behaviours that might not be spoken or shared in the space.
So helpful. There's a question here at the front, please.
Hi, my name is Patrick. I have an environmental programme for primary school children. It's been done by 100,000 Irish children, and it's based on litter picking. And we discovered that a tool for litter picking is an incredibly addictive and loved toy for both the children and the parents. So this program, it's very successful, everybody loves it, and people are always coming up to me and saying, are you going to do an app? Or when are you going to do a game? Or have you done any merch? Or that would make really, And I came here, this is the first time I've been here, with a view to understanding the landscape of, you lot, and seeing what are the next steps. So we've got this huge slave ring of children. Should we, what play elements should we add to that, and how would that work? Do you have any ideas?
Patrick needs help.
That is true as well.
How old are the children?
Thank you.
How old are the children?
6 to 9.
I think you've got to sort out your merch. We actually made a show prior to this called Go Green with the Grimwades. Yeah, which was it focused on litter. There was an episode that focused on litter picking, and I'm probably not the best person to answer this, but because I think in terms of the gamification or the kind of turning into an app. But I think what we learned from that is that it did become that transferable thing from screen to game. So I suppose it just kind of emphasised what you're saying, is that we learned that this was not just a functional thing, but also a very practical toy. You get kids doing stuff whilst actually engaging with a game. No, I'll revert back to get the merch sorted.
I would just say, coming back to what Amanda said and thinking about a full ecosystem, never start with a technology. Or if you do start with a technology, it's really to ask, what are the affordances of this technology, that can't be done in other mechanisms. And I think that's kind of where to begin, because ultimately we do want to create contextual experiences that prompt a child to take knowledge or inspiration from one thing, play and test it out in another context, move on and do something. So formats are really important for kind of creating that full ecosystem, but thinking about contextually what is potentially missing from this ecosystem, what type of agency or skill or social emotional, different kind of play types, what's kind of missing from the ecosystem, and what do different types of technology afford you to do. And that's kind of your starting point. And, any kind of questions or mini prototypes or ideas that you can develop in very high level sense can be taken to that panel of children to be torn apart and rebuilt, give them the tools to say, what's missing here, or what would you love? Or, but I think never starting with the technology as I must tick this box.
Thanks, Hattie, and we look forward to hearing about the
Yeah.
progress, Patrick, next year. There's a question at the front here. Thank you.
Hi, Kahenya from BBC Studios. This actually ties into the questions asked before, and I don't know if it's been answered yet, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg question. But editorially, I have an animation background and animation development. What have you seen to be more successful in what children engage with editorially? Starting concepts from a play theory perspective, or creating a setup and then imbuing play theory into the concept? What's more successful in engaging kids, in your experience?
It's a great question. Fantastic question.
I think we've always started from play theory, because I think all children play, and all children play with the bodies and the minds that they've been given. So that is the level. Mixed Muts, for example, using Mixed Muts, it was never about disability. It was not a show about disability. Many people have called it that, but it is definitely not. It's a show about play, and it happens to have really brilliant, authentic disability representation. So I would definitely start with the play, because then you've got relatable experiences for all children. And then I would involve some children in the story creation. We created a whole story creation thing called the Popcorn Story School, where we got children to pop ideas about things that they reminisced. Also adults, it's great to chat to adults about their play stories. So yeah, definitely start with a play. You're onto something there.
Anyone think anything different?
I was just going to add that, I was thinking through what you're saying. I do think it's powerful as a focus to start with play theory, but things that we've realised a lot through testing and early co-creation, often, with Amanda, is leaving space for emergent play. So you might go in with the idea that something is going to be really strong in a particular context, and actually through that early testing realise that there is another component that's coming through quite strongly, or children are playing with something or taking your idea and into a completely different direction. So space for emergent play, sometimes it's called transgressive play, the idea that a child kind of takes something that you've designed in one context and used it in a completely different way. I think the box. The box, exactly. So I think always leaving space to say, our hypothesis is kind of this is where it's strongest, but through this process we're going to test that is the value that a parent and a child sees from this, is what I'd say.
And the other thing I think is meeting your kids where they're at. So understanding, like you said, understanding who your audience is, meeting them where they're at, and then guiding them, scaffolding them along a pathway of development. I think that can be really powerful.
Fantastic. We are going to wrap up now, but can I just say thank you so much for a really stimulating and brilliant panel discussion. So I'm just going to clap for the panel. Because this is a tough slot. We're up against tough competition, and they've done amazing. So just thinking about where we've kind of travelled to today, we've covered everything from the fundamentals of play theory to the importance of co-creation and inclusivity. I hope you've all found the discussion valuable and insightful. Again, a huge thank you to our wonderful panel for sharing their expertise, and thank you for asking questions and supporting this session. I also wanted to thank James Waller, who produced the session. He's worked really, really hard and been a fantastic producer to work with, and also the exec producer, Sue Knott, who's been equally supportive. Before we go, I just want to...
And Bridget Banton.
Yes.